Divers opened the hatch. The crew was gone, the clocks still ticking. The cold Atlantic wind howled across the surface of the water, slicing through the pre-dawn darkness like a blade. Waves rose and fell in uneven rhythm, their crests flecked with foam under a sky still clinging to stars. It was early morning, just past 4 o'clock, on the 7th day of March in the year 1987, the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Vigilant had been dispatched from Port Canaveral after an automated distress signal flickered to life from the coordinates of the Stella, a private research vessel registered out of Norfolk, Virginia. No voice transmission followed, only the repeating pulse of a Mayday beacon, weak but persistent, like a heartbeat fading beneath ice. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? By the time the boarding team reached the hull of the Stella, the sea had grown restless. Lieutenant Thaddeus Vale, a seasoned maritime investigator with the Coast Guard's Search and Rescue Division, stood at the edge of the deck, gripping the rail as the swell lifted the cutter sideways. His breath came in short clouds, his eyes scanning the silent silhouette ahead. There were no lights aboard, no movement, just the creak of metal and the groan of stressed rivets echoing from within the darkened superstructure. "Something's wrong," muttered Petty Officer Lorne Kestrel, adjusting his helmet cam. He was younger, sharp-eyed, with a nervous energy that flared whenever silence stretched too long. No response to radio hails. No crew on deck. Not even a flare. Thaddeus didn't answer. He stepped forward, boots clanging against the gangplank as it settled onto the research vessel's main deck. The air smelled of salt, yes, but underneath, something sharper. Metallic, like old wiring or scorched insulation. He paused, hand resting on the hatch handle. It was warm, not from the sun hadn't risen yet, but from within. Heat radiated faintly through the steel, unnatural for a ship adrift in 38-degree Fahrenheit waters. He glanced back once. The rest of the team waited behind him, Kestrel, Ensign Marin Voss, and Medic Darren Cope. All wore full gear, thermal suits, respirators, sidearms. Protocol dictated caution when vessels went silent. But this wasn't just silent, this was absent, as if the world had exhaled and the Stella had been forgotten in the breath. With a slow turn, Thaddeus pulled the hatch open. A rush of stale, overheated air poured out thick with the scent of ozone and something vaguely sweet, like burnt sugar. The corridor beyond was dimly lit by emergency strips along the floor, casting long shadows up the walls. Panels hung loose from the ceiling, wires dangling like roots torn from soil. And then, there it was. The sound. Faint, rhythmic, almost musical. Clocks. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Mounted on bulkheads, bolted to consoles, taped to lockers, analog dials spinning, second hands ticking in erratic unison. Some moved forward, others backward. A few stuttered, frozen between seconds. Digital displays blinked in red, dates flashing nonsensically. January 3rd, 2005. July 9th, 1999. November 1st, 1973. None matched the current date, none made sense. But the crew gone, no bodies, no signs of struggle, no blood, no personal effects scattered. Everything was in place. Coffee cups half filled, logbooks open mid-sentence, jackets hanging neatly on hooks. A thermos sat on the galley table, still warm. Beside it, a pair of gloves' fingers curled as if recently removed. And yet, no one. Ensign Voss knelt beside a wall panel, her gloved fingers brushing over a cluster of clocks wired together with copper thread. "These aren't standard issue," she said, voice tight. "They're not even from the same manufacturer. Some look homemade." Darren Cope moved toward the sleeping quarters, door ajar, bunks made, pillows flattened, as though someone had just risen. He checked the head, the mess hall, the engine room, all empty. "It's like they vanished," he whispered. "Just stepped out of their lives." Thaddeus walked deeper into the vessel, drawn toward the central lab. That's where the heat intensified. The door was sealed shut, reinforced with a manual latch on the outside. He hesitated. Then, with a grunt, he turned the wheel and pushed. Inside, the temperature climbed near 110 degrees. Rows of monitors lined the far wall, all dark except one, a single screen glowing with shifting waveforms. pulsing in time with the ticking from the hallway. In the center of the room stood a cylindrical chamber, roughly 6 feet tall, constructed of polished steel and glass. It hummed softly, a low frequency vibrating through the floor. Wires snaked from its base into a junction box labeled Temporal Feedback Array. Do not disconnect. Thaddeus approached slowly. On the console beside the chamber, a logbook lay open. The last entry read, March 6th, 1987, final test initiated at 2200 hours. Field stabilized at 0.87 terahertz. Temporal resonance achieved. Crew reporting mild disorientation. Clock drift noted in adjacent sectors. Proceeding to Phase 3 despite protocol concerns. Dr. Corwin Hale insists integrity holds. If this works, we may witness causality inversion. God help us if we don't return. Below it, scrawled in different ink, shaky and urgent, we weren't supposed to see it. We weren't supposed to remember. The clock doesn't move forward, it chooses. It chose to erase us. Don't open the chamber, don't listen to the ticks. They're not counting time, they're counting down to when you forget too. Thaddeus stared at the page, his throat tightened. Behind him, Kestrel entered, breathing hard. Lieutenant, you need to see this. He led Thaddeus back to the bridge. The navigation system was offline, but the backup chronometer, factory sealed, never tampered with, was spinning wildly. Not just the second hand, the entire mechanism, hour, minute, second revolving in reverse. And then, abruptly, stopping. It read, 4:17 a.m., March 7th, 1987. Exactly the time they had arrived. No, Thaddeus breathed. That's impossible. Kestrel pointed to the radar scope. Empty. No other vessels within 50 nautical miles, no aircraft, nothing. Yet on the communications board, the tape recorder was running. They rewound it, pressed play. Static. Then a voice, calm, familiar. It was Thaddeus's own. This is Lieutenant Thaddeus Vale. We've boarded the Maristella at approximately 4:17 M crew is missing, systems compromised. Recommend immediate quarantine and retrieval. Do not approach the central chamber. Repeat, do not open it. The recording ended. Silence fell like a weight. Marin Voss looked up, face pale. That was just recorded. We haven't reported anything yet. Thaddeus turned toward the lab. The humming had changed, grown louder, more insistent. The single monitor now displayed a new message, scrolling in crisp white text. Initiation sequence repeated. Observers registered. Temporal loop confirmed. And below it, previous attempt failed. This cycle must succeed. Darren backed away, shaking his head. We weren't the first ones here, were we? Thaddeus didn't answer. He remembered the thermos, the gloves, the warmth. Someone had been here moments before, or someone would be, and they'd left clues, warnings, for themselves. Because if time wasn't linear, if the past and future could bleed into the present, then perhaps they weren't rescuers. Perhaps they were echoes. Back in the lab, the chamber began to vibrate. A thin crack appeared in the glass. From within, a shadow shifted. Not human, not quite, but familiar. As if seen in a dream, or remembered from a photograph taken years ago. And then the clock stopped. Every single one. The silence was deafening. For 3 heartbeats, nothing moved. Then, simultaneously, they restarted. But this time, they all showed the same time. 4:13 a.m., March 7th, 1987. 4 minutes earlier. Thaddeus felt it then, a pressure behind his eyes, a tingling in his fingertips. A memory surged, unbidden. Standing on this very deck, gripping the hatch, hearing Kestrel say, something's wrong, as if for the first time, only he hadn't remembered that before. Or had he? He turned to the others. Their faces were blank, confused, as if waking from sleep. What? What are we doing here? Marin asked, blinking rapidly. We just arrived, Kestrel said, stepping forward. No response to radio hails, no crew on deck, not even a flare. Thaddeus froze. He had heard this before. He had lived this before. And in that moment, he understood. They weren't breaking into the loop. They were trapped inside it. The Maristella wasn't abandoned. It was waiting for them to make the same mistake again. And somewhere, deep in the bowels of the ship, the chamber pulsed once, like a heart remembering how to beat. Months later, the official report listed the Maristella as lost at sea, presumed sunk during a sudden storm front. All hands missing, presumed dead, the case was closed, files archived, survivors, none. Evidence, scant. Just a few corrupted audio logs, a set of mismatched timestamps, and one handwritten note found in Thaddeus Vale's personal effects delivered to his sister's home in Asheville, North Carolina, with no return address, postmarked June 11th, 1987. The note read simply, "I remember the clocks. I remember the heat. I remember saying the same words, seeing the same faces. I don't know how many times I've lived this. But I know one thing, if you're reading this, I failed again. And you're next. Listen carefully. When you hear the ticking, don't follow it. Don't open the hatch. And whatever you do, don't trust the time on your watch." The letter was dated March 7th, 1987. But the postmark was from March 7th, 2024. And in a small attic drawer in Asheville, buried beneath old photographs and yellowed letters, a single analog clock sits untouched. Its hands have not moved in 37 years. Yet every night, at exactly 4:17 a.m., it ticks once, as if reminding someone, as if calling them back. Missing 411, vanished in broad daylight 20 feet from family. On a crisp October afternoon in the year 1997, beneath a sky of pale blue streaked with wisps of cloud like torn lace, the small town of Pine Hollow, nestled in the rugged folds of northern Idaho, seemed untouched by urgency or fear. The air carried the faint scent of pine resin and damp earth, remnants of an early morning frost that had melted under the sun's gentle gaze. Children played near the edge of the woods behind their homes, their laughter echoing across open fields where goldenrod swayed in the breeze. It was one of those rare autumn days when time felt suspended, when even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? At precisely 3:28 in the afternoon on the 14th day of October, 1997, Elias Thornwood, a quiet boy of 9 years old, with eyes the color of storm clouds and hair so dark it almost swallowed the light, vanished without a sound. He wasn't taken from a dark alley, nor snatched during a thunderstorm, nor lured into the shadows by a stranger with hollow promises. No, he disappeared in broad daylight, just 20 feet from where his family stood, gathered in their backyard for a simple Sunday gathering. The Thornwoods lived in a modest 2-story cedar house at the end of Hemlock Lane, a gravel road fringed by towering pines and thick underbrush. Their property backed onto the dense expanse of the Bitterroot National Forest, where deer trails wound through ferns and fallen logs, and silence often pressed against the ears like cotton. That day, Elias's grandmother, Margaret, had come down from Missoula to visit. His father, Harlan, a mechanic with calloused hands and a voice like gravel rolling in a tin can, was grilling bratwurst over a charcoal fire. His mother, Lila, wore her favorite lavender apron and stirred a pot of apple cider spiced with cinnamon and cloves. His older sister, Cora, then 11, sat cross-legged on a patch of grass, braiding daisies into a crown while humming an old folk tune passed down from her great-aunt. Elias had been playing hide-and-seek with the neighbor's son, Joran Pike, a wiry boy with freckles scattered across his nose like pepper. They'd agreed on boundaries, the fence line, the old oak tree with the tire swing, and the edge of the woods, which both parents had strictly forbidden them from crossing. Not beyond the stump, Harlan had said earlier, pointing to a moss-covered log half buried in ivy. That forest doesn't forgive mistakes. It was just after 3 o'clock when Joran ducked behind the woodpile near the garage, giggling as Elias counted aloud, his back pressed against the cherry tree in the center of the yard. 10, 9, 8. His voice rang clear and bright. Birds chirped in the hedges. A dog barked somewhere down the lane. The world felt safe, predictable. When Elias reached 0, he turned, scanned the yard, and called out, "Ready or not?" He found Joran quickly, bursting from behind the logs with a triumphant whoop. Then came the next round. This time, Elias hid. He darted toward the far side of the yard, near the rusted garden shed where tomato vines curled around broken trellises. He crouched low, pressing himself into the shadow of the wall, heart thudding with excitement. The plan was simple. He would stay hidden until Joran gave up and called his name. but he never emerged. 3:28. That's when Cora first noticed. She looked up from her flower crown, squinting across the lawn. "Where's Elias?" she asked, her voice light at first, tinged only with mild curiosity. No one answered immediately. Harlan flipped a sausage with tongs. Lila poured cider into mugs. Margaret rocked gently in the folding chair, knitting needles clicking. "Elias?" Cora called again, louder this time. Still nothing. Yoren frowned. "He was right here. I saw him go behind the shed." Harlan set the tongs down. "Elias, enough hiding now." Silence. Then, movement, a flicker of unease passing between the adults like a cold draft under a door. Lila wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward the shed, her steps quickening. "Elias? Sweetheart, come out. Dinner's ready." She peered around the corner. Nothing. Just a scattering of fallen leaves and a single red sneaker lying on its side. Her breath caught. "Harlan?" Her voice cracked like dry wood. "He's not here." Within seconds, the peaceful backyard erupted into chaos. Harlan sprinted to the shed, circled it twice, then pushed through the tall grass toward the tree line. "Elias! Elias!" His shouts tore through the stillness, sharp and desperate. Joran began to cry. Cora stood frozen, clutching her unfinished daisy chain, her knuckles white. Margaret rose slowly, her knitting falling to the ground. "He wouldn't go into the woods," she whispered. "He knows better." But the truth was undeniable. The boundary line marked by the old stump had been crossed. A trail of crushed ferns and disturbed soil led directly into the trees. And then, abruptly, the trail ended, as if the earth itself had swallowed him whole. Neighbors arrived within minutes. Sheriff Dale Mercer, a man with salt and pepper hair and a slow, deliberate way of speaking, arrived with 2 deputies and a German shepherd named Rex. Search teams fanned out through the forest, calling Elias's name, their flashlights cutting beams through the thinning light. Volunteers joined in local hunters, school teachers, even the postman, Mr. Havelock, who had delivered mail on Hemlock Lane for 32 years. They searched all night, they searched the next day, they dragged the creek behind the property, combed abandoned mining shafts half a mile east, checked every cabin and trailer within a 10-mile radius. Helicopters circled overhead, their rotors beating the air like frantic wings. Nothing. No footprints beyond the initial trail, no clothing snagged on branches, no signs of struggle, no ransom note, no suspicious vehicles reported. Elias Thornwood had simply ceased to exist, 20 feet from the people who loved him most. The investigation stretched for months. FBI agents reviewed grainy security footage from a gas station 3 miles away useless. Psychics were consulted, though Sheriff Mercer rolled his eyes and called them noisemakers. Tips poured in, some credible, most not. A woman in Spokane claimed she saw a boy matching Elias's description boarding a Greyhound bus with a man in a brown coat. Another caller said he'd seen a van parked near the forest edge around 3:15 that day, engine running, windows tinted, but no license plate, no confirmation. And then, silence. Years passed. The missing posters yellowed and peeled from telephone poles, the search parties disbanded. The case file grew thick with dead ends and unanswered questions, eventually labeled inactive by the county office. Yet, the Thornwoods never stopped looking. Lila kept Elias's room exactly as it was, blue walls with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, a toy truck overturned on the rug, a book splayed open on the bed. Every birthday, she lit a candle. Every Christmas, she placed a present under the tree with his name on it. Harlan quit his job at the garage and spent weekends hiking deep into the bitterroots, carving markers into trees, whispering his son's name into the wind. Cora, once a carefree girl with wildflower crowns and scraped knees, grew into a woman haunted by memory. She studied forensic anthropology at the University of Montana, determined to understand how someone could vanish without a trace. She wrote letters to missing persons databases, compared Elias's case to others, especially those in national parks or remote areas. That's when she stumbled upon something unsettling. There were patterns. Boys, mostly between the ages of 8 and 12, disappeared near forests, often within sight of family, no evidence of abduction, no bodies ever recovered. Cases scattered across different states, Montana, Colorado, New Hampshire, West Virginia, but clustered strangely around protected wilderness areas, federal land, regions with limited surveillance. One researcher, David Paulides, had compiled dozens of these cases under a project he called Missing 411. When Cora read his work, her blood ran cold. Elias's disappearance fit the profile perfectly: daylight, proximity to family, sudden absence, lack of forensic evidence. Even the terrain matched: soft soil, dense canopy, poor cell reception. But why? What connected these children? Some theories surfaced: wild animals, though no claw marks, no remains; runaways, though none left notes or took belongings; foul play by strangers, yet no witnesses, no DNA. Others whispered about more troubling possibilities: coordinated abductions, underground networks, or something darker, something the official reports refused to acknowledge. Then came the rumors. Hunters in the Bitterroots spoke in hushed tones about figures seen deep in the woods, tall, unnaturally still, moving without sound. Old-timers recalled stories from native elders about the vanishing people, spirits said to dwell in the high timber, who took children who strayed too far. Some believed the forest itself had a consciousness, a hunger. Sheriff Mercer dismissed such talk. "Grief makes people see ghosts," he said once, leaning against his cruiser outside the diner on Main Street. Truth is, sometimes bad things happen for no reason, and sometimes we never get answers. But Cora couldn't accept that. In the spring of 2016, 17 years after Elias vanished, she returned to Pine Hollow with a team of researchers and a drone equipped with thermal imaging. They scanned the forest floor, focusing on the area just beyond the stump. On the third day, the drone detected an anomaly, a shallow depression in the earth, roughly the size of a child, partially concealed by roots and moss. Soil samples revealed traces of human decomposition, but DNA testing yielded inconclusive results. Too degraded, too old. Still, it was something. That night, Cora sat on the porch of the old house, now weathered and quiet, rocking in her grandmother's chair. The stars blinked above, cold and distant. A breeze stirred the pines, whispering through the needles like voices just below hearing. And then, faintly, she heard it. A giggle, high-pitched, familiar. It came from the edge of the woods. She stood, heart hammering, eyes fixed on the darkness. "Elias?" she whispered. No answer, only the wind. But the next morning, nestled among the roots of the old oak, they found it: a small wooden horse, hand-carved, one ear chipped. It had belonged to Elias. He'd carried it everywhere. It was gone the day he disappeared. Now it was back. No fingerprints, no footprints, just the toy, resting on a bed of pine cones as if placed there with care. The local news picked up the story briefly. "Ghostly return," read one headline. "Mystery deepens in cold case," said another. But soon, attention faded. Life moved on. Except for Cora. She now lives in Pine Hollow year-round, working from a home office filled with maps, photographs, and binders labeled Project Echo, her personal archive dedicated to unresolved disappearances. She gives lectures at universities, appears on podcasts, urges families to speak up, to question, to remember. And every October 14th, at precisely 3:28 in the afternoon, she walks to the edge of the woods, stands at the moss-covered stump, and calls her brother's name. Sometimes, she says, the wind answers. Other times, the silence is unbearable. But she continues, because as long as one person remembers, Elias Thornwood is not truly gone. And perhaps, just perhaps, he is waiting. Waiting for someone to finally listen. To finally look not just outward into the trees, but inward into the spaces between memory and myth, where truth sometimes hides in plain sight. Like a child behind a garden shed, smiling, counting down until someone finds him, or until the forest takes another. The preacher's doomsday calendar was wrong except for one date. In the quiet town of Harlan, nestled deep within the Appalachian foothills of eastern Kentucky, a man named Thaddeus Vale once stood atop a rusted grain silo on the edge of an abandoned farm, his arms outstretched beneath a bruised twilight sky. It was the autumn of 1998, and the air carried the scent of damp earth and burning leaves, crisp with the promise of change, or so he claimed. Clad in a long charcoal-colored coat that fluttered like crow's wings in the wind, Thaddeus held aloft a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with intricate diagrams, celestial alignments, and what he called the true calendar of divine reckoning. He wasn't a pastor in any official denomination, nor did he preach from a pulpit, but people came all the same, drawn by whispers, by fear, by a hunger for certainty in uncertain times. He spoke not in sermons, but in riddles wrapped in prophecy, warning that the world would end in stages, each date marked by fire, flood, or silence. The first, he said, would come on the 3rd day of April, 2001, a great falling from the sky, a judgment upon the proud towers of men. Then, on the 9th day of July, 2003, rivers would run black and the stars would blink out for 7 hours. By the winter solstice of 2005, he declared, every mirror in the world would crack at exactly 3:17 in the morning, Eastern Standard Time. His followers, numbering nearly 400 at their peak, sold homes, quit jobs, and gathered in communal shelters built from scrap wood and salvaged metal, waiting. But none of it happened. April passed without incident. July brought only heat and thunderstorms. On that winter morning in 2005, people woke to find their mirrors intact, their coffee still warm, the world stubbornly ordinary. Disillusionment spread like frost across a window pane. Families left, supplies dwindled, the shelters fell into disrepair, overtaken by kudzu and foxes. Thaddeus himself vanished shortly after, last seen boarding a Greyhound bus bound for Memphis, his journal tucked beneath his arm, his eyes hollow with something between regret and defiance. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Now, fast forward to the spring of 2023. A young archivist named Elwyn Price, originally from Asheville, North Carolina, though raised mostly in rural Ohio, was sorting through a donation box at the Ossuary Archive in Lexington, a little-known repository for forgotten religious texts and apocalyptic ephemera. Among crumbling pamphlets and hand-drawn star charts, she found it. Thaddeus Vale's journal, its spine cracked, its pages brittle as dried petals. At first, she paid it little mind, just another relic of millennial panic, another voice lost to time. But then, late one rainy Tuesday night, she flipped to the final page. There, in faded ink, was a single line written in a trembling hand. And when all else has failed, look to the 7th hour of the 13th day of October, 2023. That one I saw clearly. Elwyn paused. She checked the date on her phone. October 13th, 2023, exactly 1 week away. She told no one at first. Not her supervisor, Dr. Calix Renner, a stern man with wire-rimmed glasses who believed fervently in cataloging, not interpreting. Not even her roommate, a folk musician named Jory, who played a battered upright bass and claimed to speak in dreams with dead jazz trumpeters. But she couldn't let it go. There was something about the phrasing, the specificity, the weight of it. It didn't sound like the rambling of a madman. It sounded like a confession. So she began to dig. Thaddeus had based his calendar on a blend of numerology, obscure biblical exegesis, and astronomical cycles, particularly the precession of the equinoxes and the rare alignment of Jupiter and Saturn known as the Great Conjunction. Most of his calculations were flawed, built on misreadings of ancient texts and self-invented ciphers. But this final date, October 13th, 2023, coincided with nothing major in the astronomical record. No eclipse, no meteor shower, no planetary alignment of significance. And yet Elwyn noticed something strange. On that exact day, at precisely 7 o'clock in the evening Eastern Daylight Time, the moon would be at perigee, the closest point to Earth in its orbit, and positioned directly over the central United States. At that moment, the sun would have just set in Harlan, Kentucky. Coincidence? Perhaps. But then she found a second clue. Buried in an old police report from November of 2005, a year after Thaddeus disappeared, a deputy in Harlan County mentioned investigating a small fire at the remains of one of the doomsday shelters. Inside, scorched but legible, was a chalkboard with the same date, October 13th, 2023. Beneath it, someone had written, "It isn't destruction, it's remembrance." Elwyn's breath caught. She booked a train to Harlan. The journey took nearly 10 hours. winding through the Blue Ridge Mountains, past coal towns with sagging porches, and churches painted white with peeling trim. When she arrived, the air was thick with the smell of pine and distant rain. Autumn had already begun to paint the hills in amber and rust. She checked into a modest inn called the Hollow Pines Motel, room number 6, where the heater rattled and the curtains smelled faintly of mildew. That evening, she drove out to the old shelter site, guided by GPS and a hand-drawn map she'd copied from the journal. The structure was gone, only a concrete slab remained, half swallowed by ivy and wild blackberry vines. But as she stepped onto it, something shifted in the air. A stillness. A hush, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. She pulled out her phone, opened the voice recorder, and whispered, "It's October 12th. Tomorrow at 7 p.m., I'll be back." She returned at 6:45 the next evening. The sky was overcast, pale gray, streaked with violet at the edges. A cool wind moved through the trees, making the leaves shiver like hands in prayer. She sat on the edge of the slab, her jacket pulled tight, watching the minutes tick by on her watch. 6:52. 6:55. 6:58. At 6:59, the wind stopped. Not gradually, not fading. It ceased as if cut by a blade. Silence pressed down, thick and unnatural. No birds, no crickets. Even the distant hum of a highway seemed to vanish. Her pulse quickened. She glanced around, half expecting shadows to move on their own. Then, at exactly 7 p.m., a single tone echoed through the valley, low, resonant, like a bell struck deep underground. It lasted only 3 seconds, then faded, and just as quickly, the wind returned, rustling the branches, breaking the stillness. Elowen stood frozen, her skin prickled. She reached into her bag and pulled out a portable spectrum analyzer she'd borrowed from a physics professor friend, something meant to detect electromagnetic anomalies. To her astonishment, it had recorded a brief spike in low-frequency waves at exactly 7 o'clock frequency, matching no known natural source, and lasting precisely 2.8 seconds. She stared at the screen, heart pounding. Was it man-made, a military test, a geological event, or was it impossibly something else? She spent the next 6 months chasing answers. She interviewed elderly locals who remembered Thaddeus Vale, some with reverence, others with scorn. One woman, Mavis Cray, who had been 16 when the shelters were built, recalled seeing Thaddeus standing alone at midnight on New Year's Eve, 2000, staring at the stars and weeping. He kept saying, "I got most of it wrong, but one day I saw it clear." Another man, a retired geologist named Silas Tovey, confirmed that the region sat atop a network of ancient quartz veins, minerals known to amplify electromagnetic signals under certain conditions. Could Thaddeus have known? Had he discovered something by accident, by vision, by madness that science had yet to explain? Elowen published her findings in a small academic journal, careful not to claim proof, only possibility. She titled it Anomalous Temporal Events and the Psychology of Prophetic Failure. It garnered little attention except from one person. A letter arrived at the archive 6 weeks later, postmarked from Boise, Idaho. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper, typewritten, "You were there. I saw you on the slab. You heard it too. I've waited 20 years. He told me it would happen only once. Only for those who believed enough to doubt. Tell me, did you feel it?" Not sound, not vibration, but memory. As if the world remembered something it had forgotten. No signature. Just that. Elowen never replied. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the streetlights flicker outside her window in Columbus, where she now lives, she opens the journal again. She runs her fingers over that final line. That one, I saw clearly. And she wonders, was it a hoax? A delusion? Or did Thaddeus Vale, in all his flawed brilliance, truly glimpse one moment not of destruction, but of resonance? A single date when time bent just enough for something to slip through? Not the end of the world, but a whisper from it. Think about that. What if the apocalypse isn't fire and ruin? What if it's a moment so quiet, so precise, that only the ones who are truly listening will ever know it happened? And what if it already did? October 13th, 2023, 7 o'clock in the evening, Eastern Daylight Time. In a field in Kentucky, beneath a motionless sky, a tone rang out, brief, unexplained, undeniable. And somewhere, perhaps, Thaddeus Vale smiled. Because even prophets get things wrong. But sometimes, just once, they're right. And when they are, the world doesn't end. It simply pauses and listens.
The stories. Why these ranger station receipts still don't add up. In the fall of 2016, a set of receipts found at a remote ranger station raised more questions than answers. The station sat near a state forest in northern Oregon, surrounded by tall fir trees and steep dirt trails. It was used mostly during summer fire patrols, but in October it was supposed to be empty. Yet someone had been there recently enough to leave coffee stains on the counter and fresh tire tracks outside. The main caretaker that year was a 41-year-old ranger named Ellis Grady. He had worked for the state forestry department for over a decade and was known for being organized. When Ellis went missing for 2 days in early November, his coworkers assumed his truck had broken down on the backroads again. He returned quietly that Wednesday morning, pale and distracted, claiming he had been checking fire cameras deeper in the valley. But when the office assistant filed his expense paperwork, she noticed something strange about his fuel receipts. The dates and amounts didn't match the department's card records. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? At first, no one paid much attention. Rangers often paid for fuel out of pocket and turned in the slips later. But the accounting team flagged the entries because they came from a gas station nearly 70 miles off his assigned patrol route. The receipts were time-stamped 2 nights before he returned, right around the time he was unreachable by radio. The manager called him in for a short meeting, but Ellis brushed it off, saying he must have grabbed the wrong slips. Then he went back to work like nothing had happened. 2 weeks later, the night duty ranger stopped at the same outpost and noticed the door unlocked. Inside, lights were on, and someone had clearly been there. Coffee was still warm in the mug, and a jacket hung on the hook near the door. A few papers sat on the counter, pinned under a half-eaten granola bar. When the ranger flipped one over, he saw a receipt from the same station near the coast, dated that very day. It had Ellis's signature at the bottom. When questioned again, Ellis looked shaken. He admitted he had been there that morning, but claimed he just liked driving the scenic route to clear his head. His supervisor didn't find that convincing. The ranger station wasn't even close to the coastal highway. The dirt road leading there was partially blocked by fallen branches from the last storm, and no patrol had been assigned west of the ridge in weeks. Later, one of the younger rangers named Lydia found Ellis's old logbook. Inside, the last few pages were torn out. The remaining entries mentioned several trips out to check Tower 17, a decommissioned lookout on a ridge above an old mining road. That tower had been boarded up for years after a small landslide shifted the foundation. Nobody was supposed to go near it, but the receipts, when mapped, showed a pattern leading right in that direction. In December, a state audit began. Investigators collected the receipts and compared timestamps with the department's truck GPS logs. The logs confirmed that Ellis's vehicle had gone off-route 3 times in late October. Each time, he stayed parked in the same area for several hours. No maintenance work or inspections had been scheduled there. When the auditors interviewed Ellis, he denied staying overnight and insisted the logs were inaccurate. Still, his supervisor noticed the smell of mildew and campfire smoke on his jacket, as if he had been sleeping outdoors. A retired ranger named Hal, who used to work those trails, came forward after hearing rumors. He told the auditors that Tower 17 wasn't completely empty. Inside the storage room below the lookout floor, there were boxes of old survey records and equipment, some of which had been used decades earlier to mark water boundaries. He said if anyone wanted to hide something out there, it would go unnoticed for months. That prompted a small search. 2 rangers and a deputy hiked up to the ridge on a mild January morning. They found tire tracks that matched the department vehicle and a flattened patch of grass behind the tower. Inside, they found the storage boxes Hal mentioned. Most were filled with faded maps and water samples sealed in glass jars. But under one box was a torn envelope containing several small gas receipts folded together. Each had Ellis's handwriting and the same coastal gas station stamp. When Ellis was told about this discovery, he reportedly said, Then someone's messing with me. He claimed he had never been inside that tower and suggested maybe someone else had used his name. But handwriting experts later confirmed that the signatures were consistent with his previous expense forms. It wasn't conclusive evidence of wrongdoing, but it didn't make sense either. The total fuel listed on those receipts was more than his truck could even hold. The forest department quietly placed Ellis on leave while they continued looking into what he was doing on those off-route trips. They interviewed people from nearby towns, asking if anyone had seen a white government pickup in late October. A mechanic from a service station 20 miles south recalled a man in a ranger uniform buying fuel from a portable drum around that time. He couldn't be sure it was Ellis, but he remembered the guy paid cash and seemed in a hurry. By early spring, the case went cold. The department moved on, Ellis resigned, and the receipts were boxed up with the rest of the audit files. But in 2019, a new ranger named Theo discovered something while clearing out the same outpost. He found a metal coffee tin hidden behind a loose board under the counter. Inside were several folded papers, damp but legible. They were fuel receipts again, all from that same coastal station. The latest date was November 3rd, 2016, the night Ellis had gone missing. Each receipt had strange notes scribbled on the back. One read, "No radio past Ridge." Another said, "3 lights south of tower." The handwriting matched Ellis's older logs. The department contacted him again, but he refused to comment. A few weeks later, he reportedly moved to Montana and stopped responding to emails. Since then, the receipts have been filed in the regional archive. Some employees still talk about the case, mostly as a cautionary tale. Every few years, new staff find copies during routine checks and bring them up again, wondering what he was doing out there. The gas station itself closed down in 2017, so no new records could be verified. The old cashier who worked there remembered a quiet man in uniform coming in several times that fall, always after midnight, always buying coffee and fuel, never talking much. No criminal charges were ever filed. The department concluded there wasn't enough evidence to prove misconduct, only inconsistencies in the paperwork. Yet to this day, those ranger station receipts still don't add up. Some say Ellis was running a side job with off-book fuel sales. Others think he was covering up something that happened near that old tower. But whatever the truth was, it remains buried somewhere in the hills beyond the ridge, where the radios still go silent and the trail signs fade away each winter. The stories. Phone recording documented their final minutes. The file that surfaced last winter was short and brutal, and local dispatch confirmed the voices matched a missing maintenance pair. Greta Lyle, 32, a small-town reporter, listened 3 times before writing anything because the last minute hid everything important. Greta lived in a valley where the hills felt close, and the roads curled between pines that ate cell bars after mile 6. Her editor wanted a follow-up on the county's mothballed call boxes, and she planned a simple piece about budgets and weathered steel. The plan changed when a man left a padded envelope at the office desk, and the receptionist slid it toward Greta. Inside lay a cheap thumb drive and a handwritten note that said, "Play it now," which was not exactly subtle guidance. The audio began with tires crushing wet grit and a fan belt squeal, then a breathy laugh that carried a little nervous catch. A woman said, "Hit record anyway," and a man replied, "We will just send it to Burgess later," and gravel pinged the undercarriage. Greta paused there and rewound because archived calls mentioned a supply clerk named Burgess, and the tone was easy routine. Dispatch had logged their crew leaving the yard after lunch, and the destination was a ranger turnout near a decommissioned radio tower. The county named them as Mara Keene, 29, and Colby Ash, 33. Both contract road technicians paid hourly wages. They were fixing marker posts along a flood reroute where tourists kept missing the detour, according to a memo Greta later obtained. She kept a yellow notebook, and she recorded exact timestamps straight from the audio, then cross-matched with the dispatch exit time. Static rose and fell like weak FM, which fit a corridor where the timber wall trapped signals, something locals complain about every spring. The woman on the file spoke again, and her voice changed colors like people do when they feel watched, but pretend they do not. "Do you see that cone?" she asked, and the man said, "Not our brand." Then the truck door chirped, then another small, impatient silence. 2 clicks sounded like metal against plastic, which Greta later matched to the folding rod used to set reflective stakes at bends. A train horn cried far away with 2 short blasts, then 1, and Greta wrote that pattern down and circled it 3 times. A witness told her a freight line hugs the river, and the drainage there creates its own echo that stacks horns out strangely. If the pattern matched that schedule, she could place the recording on a map within minutes, which is all any timeline really needs. At 23 minutes in, a male voice new to the scene drifted across the microphone, thin and half carried by the wind. "You folks need a hookup," he said. And a second voice we never hear again muttered something that sounded like numbers and road letters. Greta paused again and wrote an underline under the word hookup because that is tow slang, and Colby worked nights at an actual wrecker. He would not pay cash for a roadside pull unless something felt wrong, and the county did not call contractors to rescue their own truck. Colby said, "We are good," and the stranger answered, "Road is closed ahead," which matched a rumor about impassable washouts that week. Greta called the county shop and asked about the washouts, and a foreman said the road was soft but open with flagged cones. The file captured an engine idling close, and a beeper chirped 3 times, the exact rhythm used by older reverse alarms on flatbeds. A chain clinked against a bumper, and the woman whispered, "We should go." Then the phone scuffed fabric as someone reset their grip. Greta listened to that fabric sound again and again because the microphone scraped a zipper, which gave brand and suggested jacket style. She went to the surplus store and found county-issued windbreakers with chunky metal pulls that rasp exactly like the noise at 19. The envelope had no return address, but courier records put it at a copy shop where a camera watched the counter until closing time. The clerk remembered a man with a field jacket and a gray cap, and he bought a single USB stick with cash and no receipt. Greta did not print that part, and she did not share it with anyone besides her editor, because he asked for caution and patience. Instead, she drove the turnout on a weekday afternoon and brought a friend who knew rail schedules, then they listened at the shoulder. The freight line sang through the ravine, and the horn called twice, then once, and the echo folded back with the same aching cadence. She drew a circle over the map where that sound best fit, then paced off the shoulder and found a rut that bit deep and straight. Down the slope, hidden by alder, lay an abandoned callbox faceplate with new screws driven into old holes, clean and too shiny. The county had removed the boxes after a storm in 2019, and crews reported salvage thieves yanking wire for quick cash. Greta photographed the screws and the plate, then noted fresh shoe prints with a square heel that looked like a hardware store special. Her phone had no bars, so she returned to town and requested traffic camera pulls for the nearest intersection where coverage still worked. A state tech sent stills from a ridge camera that framed taillights heading toward the turnout after midday in a light, steady rain. One frame showed a retired tow truck with faded lettering, and the next showed the county pickup tucked behind it like a shy cousin. Greta played the audio again and caught a faint double click at 29, the sound of a handheld radio powering and squelching. That detail mattered because the county monitors one frequency while tow outfits use another, and she recognized the wrong hiss entirely. She interviewed a grocery clerk who stocked drinks near the bin of hand warmers, and he remembered selling 2 sleeves to a road tech. The receipt time sat within 10 minutes of the exit log, and his detail about the jacket patch matched the issued windbreakers perfectly. A bartender at the junction recalled a flatbed guy bragging about his old badge from a volunteer rescue club that folded years ago. He liked to flash it to get lanes cleared, and he kept a coil of chain in the cab, and he always smelled like 2 cycle gas. Greta ran the plate fragments from the ridge stills through a spreadsheet of county surplus auctions, and one number set rang familiar. A retired truck had been sold to a seasonal contractor 5 years back, and that contractor worked grading crews through 3 winters. She asked the yard boss for copies of work orders and found add-ons for road closures that never reached the public board for posting. 3 were billed to a line called Emergency Barricade Verification, which can pass quiet if everyone is cold and trying to go home. Greta returned to the file and let the final minute run without a pause, and the sound tightened like a knot being cinched hard. "Back it down," said the stranger, and another voice said, "Winch." Then the engine strained, then the woman whispered, "No, wait, please." Her phone captured boots on gravel and a hollow shutter like a box panel being struck by a fist, then a clatter of chains settling again. Colby said, "We are leaving," and the stranger replied, "Road is closed." Then something metallic squealed, and the microphone hit the seat. Greta recognized the squeal later when a mechanic showed her a retired foot brake on that model, which locks if someone yanks hard. A second engine revved and then drifted away, and the train horn cried again, which pinned the window tighter than any wristwatch could. The file ended with water, sound, and wind, and then a barely audible sentence that a lab enhanced for the sheriff before the case closed. A female voice whispered, "He is not alone," which fits the bartender's story, and one traffic still that shows a second vehicle tailing the flatbed. Greta never wrote the name of the contractor who later died in a solo wreck on a dirt connector above the timber line in early spring. The county cited the company for unpermitted closure devices, and a civil suit settled quietly after an insurance review and sealed filings. The recording was cited in the settlement as contemporaneous documentation, which means the phone created a timeline that prosecutors trust completely. It helped link unreported cones, a counterfeit callbox faceplate, and an old truck beeper that chirped a signature three-note pattern. Greta visited the turnout one more time when the snow melted, and she stood where the ruts cut dark through the alder roots. She listened for horns and for chain, and she watched the waterline move, and she wrote names she would never print anywhere. A retired dispatcher took her call and confirmed that a training tape from 2015 uses the same three beeper chirps. It teaches rookies to ignore unauthorized closures unless a county badge verifies, because anyone can buy cones and a safety vest. Greta asked him what he remembered most from long nights watching a map blink, and he said mistakes always make more sound than luck. He said a good tech marks those sounds. Then he asked if she could hear her own pencil scratching when she replayed the last minute. She told him yes, and she told him about the zipper scrape that matched the metal pull, and he laughed, then he went quiet. He said that noise meant the person tried to pocket the phone without breaking the recording, which is a trick dispatchers teach. The bartender called once more and said a woman had started bringing flowers to the turnout, and she left them at the alder cut. He asked if Greta thought the woman was family, and Greta said she did not know and that strangers honor strangers more than most. The editor killed 2 paragraphs about the towing club because it would invite noise, and he preferred the clean arc of small clues. Greta agreed, because the point was not a club or a badge or a wreck, but the way ordinary objects built a clear end. She listened one last time and heard something she had missed, which happens when minds want answers and forget to trust the quiet. The very first second carried a shy sigh like people make when they press record and pretend they are not scared of new evidence. Greta printed that detail and moved it near the top, and she explained that simple acts create proof that survives strangers and storms. She never used the word hero, and she never used wild language, and she left the title to her editor who kept things plain. When the story ran, the county announced a permanent fund for roadside beacons that log closures to a public map without excuses. Visitors call it the green light board, and techs call it the quiet wall, and the valley calls it the keen rule. Greta keeps the thumb drive in a small drawer, and she checks the timestamps now and then, and they have not changed. She believes the last decision Mara and Colby made was to document, and that choice laid stepping stones across a very dark place. The valley will always have roads that curl into quiet, and someone will always think cones look official when no one is watching. She writes that the recording made their last minutes heavier than memory, which fades and bends, and lighter than rumor, which never ends. On clear nights, the ravine carries sound like a wire, and 2 short horn calls followed by one still tag the hour. Greta parks on the shoulder, keeps her phone in her pocket, and lets the quiet work without her voice explaining every piece. The story of the thumb drive is not about a monster in the trees or a curse pinned to bad weather. It is about a phone and a breath, and the way background noises can draw a map that people can follow later. She ends notes with a sentence she never printed, because printed promises feel heavier than memory deserves when strangers are gone. Someone pressed record, and someone stayed brave for long enough and the evidence they made did not let the Valley forget.
He robbed banks without saying a word. The note was for police only. In the quiet hours of a late autumn morning, when frost still clung to the sidewalks of suburban Cleveland and the sun had barely risen above the steel-gray rooftops, a man walked into the Huntington National Bank on East 93rd Street with nothing but a folded piece of paper in his hand. It was the year 2013, November the 12th, just past 9 o'clock, and the air inside the bank was warm too, warm filled with the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the faint scent of coffee from the lobby dispenser. He wore a navy blue windbreaker, unzipped, over a plain gray hoodie, jeans that had seen too many washes, and scuffed work boots. Nothing about him stood out, not his height, not his build, not even the way he moved. Calm, deliberate, silent. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? He approached the second teller window where a woman named Marjorie, her name tag slightly crooked, was counting change into a tray. She looked up, smiled politely, and said, "Good morning. How can I help you?" He didn't return the smile, didn't speak. Instead, he slid the folded note across the counter. Marjorie picked it up, unfolded it slowly, her eyes scanning the neatly printed words. "This is a robbery. Put $10,000 in this bag. No die packs, no marked bills. I am armed. Do not alert police. This note is for you only. After I leave, call them." Beneath it, a small brown paper sack lay flat, like something from a grocery run. Her fingers trembled, her breath caught. She glanced up. He hadn't moved. His hands were empty, palms down on the counter, but his eyes, they held hers. Not angry, not wild, just steady, cold, like ice over deep water. She nodded once, turned quietly, and began gathering bills from her drawer. 10 stacks of $100 bills. She placed them carefully into the bag, sealed it with a fold, and pushed it back toward him. He took it, slid it under his jacket. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out the front door, disappearing into the pale morning light. No alarm, no shouting, no panic at first. It wasn't until 2 minutes later, when Marjorie finally pressed the silent button beneath her desk, that the chaos began. Police arrived within 4 minutes, officers Reyes and Holloway from the 5th District rolling up in a marked cruiser, lights flashing, but sirens off. By then, the man was gone, vanished. Surveillance footage showed him exiting the bank, adjusting his hood, turning left onto Euclid Avenue, walking at a normal pace, no running, no urgency, before cutting through an alley behind a shuttered laundromat. The camera lost him there. But the note? The note remained, and it would become the thread that unraveled one of the most peculiar bank robbery sprees in modern American history. His name was Thaddeus Vale. Born in 1987 in Youngstown, Ohio, a rusted city where factories once roared but now stood silent, skeletons of steel and brick overtaken by weeds and time, Thaddeus was the son of a mechanic and a school cafeteria worker, raised in a modest bungalow on Glenwood Drive, where the paint peeled in summer and the furnace rattled all winter. He was bright top of his class at Rayen High, fluent in algebra and physics, could take apart a carburetor and rebuild it blindfolded, but life had a way of bending people in ways they couldn't predict. After high school, he enrolled at Kent State University on a partial scholarship, studying mechanical engineering. But halfway through his sophomore year, his mother fell ill, pancreatic cancer, aggressive and swift. The medical bills piled up, insurance didn't cover everything. Thaddeus dropped out to care for her, working double shifts at a warehouse in Akron, hauling boxes from midnight to dawn. She passed in the spring of 2010, and when she did, something in him cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. He drifted after that, lived in motels with weekly rates, took odd jobs, janitorial work, tree trimming, snow plowing, never stayed in one place longer than a few months. He avoided people, spoke little, read constantly philosophy, criminology, old detective novels, and somewhere in those pages, in the quiet solitude of motel rooms lit by flickering lamps, an idea formed. If banks were machines, then perhaps they could be manipulated like any other mechanism. Clean, precise, no violence, no hostages, just a message, a demand, a transaction. And so, in the fall of 2013, Thaddeus Vale began his campaign. The Huntington robbery was the first, but not the last. 3 days later, on November the 15th, another note appeared, this time at a PNC branch in Parma, Ohio. Same handwriting, same calm, chilling tone, $10,000. In cash. No tricks. I will not harm anyone, but I am armed. Leave the money in the bag, walk away, call police when I'm gone. Again, no words spoken. Again, the teller complied. Again, he vanished. Then, on November the 18th, a third bank, Fifth Third, this time in Medina, same method, same silence, same result. By now, local news had caught wind. Headlines screamed, "Silent Bandit strikes again." Police released grainy stills from security footage, back of headshots, blurred faces, a man in a hoodie moving like a shadow between buildings. Task forces were assembled. Detectives pored over maps, timelines, witness statements, but Thaddeus was careful, meticulous. He never used the same route twice, always entered during shift changes, when attention wavered, always chose branches with minimal security presence, and always left the note as his only voice. What made him different wasn't just the silence, it was the precision, the lack of greed. 10,000 each time, never more, never less, no demands for 20s or 50s, always hundreds. Easy to carry, easy to hide, and never once did he threaten a teller beyond the written warning. Never raised his voice, never reached for a weapon, yet every note carried the same phrase, "I am armed." Was he? Police couldn't say for sure. No gun was ever seen, no bulge in his jacket captured on camera, but the words alone were enough. Fear doesn't need a barrel to be real. As the spree continued, 4 banks in 5 weeks, the FBI got involved. Special Agent Lorna Keene, a veteran of the Cleveland field office, took point. Sharp-eyed, mid-40s, with a reputation for solving cold cases through patience and pattern recognition, she studied every detail. The notes, the timing, the geography. She noticed something others missed. All the banks were within a 30-mile radius of Cleveland. All were mid-sized branches, not the biggest, not the smallest. All had similar layouts, 2 teller windows near the entrance, security cameras angled slightly downward, no armed guards on duty, and all were robbed between 9:15 and 10 o'clock in the morning, just after opening, before the lunch rush. More telling? Each location was near a public transit line. Bus routes, rail stations, places where a person could disappear into the flow of daily commuters. Agent Keene also studied the handwriting. Not rushed, not scribbled. Carefully printed block letters, evenly spaced, almost typewritten in their consistency, no smudges, no corrections. Whoever wrote these notes had practiced, repeatedly. And then there was the language. "I will not harm anyone." That phrase appeared in 3 of the 5 notes. Not typical for a robber. Most threats are vague, aggressive, designed to intimidate. But this sounded almost apologetic, defensive, as if he needed to justify his actions even to himself. Keene leaned back in her chair one evening, the glow of her computer screen casting long shadows across her office. Outside, rain tapped against the window. She stared at the timeline, pinned to the wall, 5 red dots marking the banks, connected by thin black lines showing possible escape routes. "He's not a criminal," she murmured. "He's a machine." Her partner, Agent Darnell, looked up from his coffee. "What?" "This isn't random. It's procedural. Every move calculated, every word chosen. He's not trying to get rich. He's trying to prove something." "Prove what?" Keene didn't answer. Not yet. Meanwhile, Thaddeus had moved on. By December the 3rd, he struck again, this time in Elyria, a quiet city west of Cleveland. Another bank, another note, another 10,000. But this time, something changed. The teller, a young man named Calvin, hesitated. He read the note, looked up, saw Thaddeus standing there, motionless. Something in his eyes, maybe the exhaustion, maybe the sorrow, made Calvin pause. Instead of reaching for the money, he wrote a note of his own on a scrap of paper. "Are you okay?" He slid it across the counter. Thaddeus blinked. For the first time in weeks, his expression shifted. Just slightly. A flicker. Confusion. Surprise. He looked at the words, then back at Calvin. Then, slowly, he reached into his pocket, not for a weapon, but for a pen. He wrote beneath Calvin's question, "I have to do this. Please, just give me the money." Calvin nodded, fetched the cash, handed it over. And Thaddeus left. But that exchange haunted him. That night, in a dimly lit motel room on Oberlin Road, he sat on the edge of the bed, the stolen money stacked neatly on the dresser. He hadn't spent $1, not one. The bags remained sealed. He hadn't bought food, clothes, shelter, nothing. He opened a notebook, thick, leather-bound, filled with equations, diagrams, lists. On the latest page, he had written, objective, $60,000. Purpose, clear debt, restore dignity, end cycle. 60,000. That was the number. The sum of his mother's unpaid medical bills, the balance that had ruined his credit, barred him from loans, kept him from rebuilding. 60,000, and he was halfway there. But now, Calvin's question echoed in his mind. Are you okay? No, he wasn't. He hadn't slept through the night in months. Dreams of his mother calling his name from a dark hallway, waking up, sweating, heart pounding. The weight of the lie, the fiction he'd created, pressed on his chest like a stone. He wasn't a monster, but he wasn't innocent either. On December the 9th, he entered a key bank in Lorraine. Same routine, same note, same silence. But as he waited for the teller to gather the money, he noticed something different. A photo on her desk. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, smiling in a yellow dress. Beside it, a small Christmas ornament, handmade, glued-on glitter, crooked star on top. His throat tightened. For the first time, he looked around. Really looked. The bank wasn't just a machine, it was full of people. A man in a suit tapping his foot, waiting to deposit a paycheck. An elderly woman struggling with her purse. A janitor mopping the far corner, humming softly. These weren't cogs, they were lives. And he was disrupting them. When the teller handed him the bag, he didn't take it immediately. He stared at it. Then at her. Her name tag read Nadia. She gave a small, nervous nod. He whispered so low, only she could hear, "I'm sorry." Then he turned and walked out. But not far. He didn't go to the alley. Didn't vanish. Instead, he sat on a bench outside a gas station half a block away, the bag at his feet, his head in his hands. 20 minutes later, Officer Reyes, same officer from the first robbery, pulled up, responding to a call about a suspicious person. He recognized the description. Hoodie, windbreaker, sitting still. He approached slowly, hand near his sidearm. "Sir, you all right?" Thaddeus didn't look up. "I robbed 5 banks," he said, voice hollow. "The money's in the bag. I didn't spend it. I want to turn myself in." Reyes froze. "You what?" "I have the notes. Everything. I'll cooperate. Just don't shoot me." And just like that, it was over. Back at the station, Thaddeus was processed quietly. No cuffs at first, no shouting. When Agent Keene entered the interrogation room, she studied him for a long moment. "You're not what I expected," she said. He looked up. "I'm not who I thought I was either." She Saturday, "Why? Why do this?" He exhaled. "To pay my mother's debts, to stop feeling like a failure. I thought if I could fix that one thing, maybe I could start over." And the silence? I didn't want to scare anyone. I didn't want to hurt anyone. Words, they can make things worse. But a note, you can read it, decide how to respond, gives people control. Keene leaned forward. "You wrote, 'I am armed every time.' Were you?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No, I wasn't. But I knew they'd believe it. Fear works faster than truth." She nodded slowly. "You're smarter than most people who do this. That's why you lasted so long. But not smart enough to know it wouldn't fix anything." "No," she agreed. "Money rarely does." The case made national headlines. The silent bandit surrenders. Note-writing robber claims he just wanted to be free. Some called him a criminal, others a tragic figure. A man broken by a system that offered no second chances. At trial, in March of 2014, Thaddeus pleaded guilty to 5 counts of bank robbery. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and tired eyes, listened to his statement. "I made a choice," he said, voice steady but quiet. "A wrong one. I thought I was correcting a mistake, but I only made another. I accept responsibility. And I apologize to the tellers, to the banks, to everyone I frightened. I'm not asking for mercy, just understanding." The courtroom was silent. The judge sentenced him to 6 years in federal prison, time credited for time served, minimum security, eligible for parole in 3. As he was led away, Agent Keene watched from the back row. Later, she visited him at the Federal Correctional Institution in Elkton. "How are you?" she asked. "Better," he said. "I read, I write, I help teach math to other inmates. I'm thinking." "About what?" "Starting over. Legally. Honestly. Maybe becoming a counselor. For people who feel trapped." She smiled faintly. "You'd be good at that." He looked out the window. Snow was falling gently over the yard. "I finally understand," he said. "The note wasn't for the police. It was for me. A way to pretend I wasn't really doing this. To keep my conscience quiet. And now? Now I speak. Even when it hurts." Years passed. Thaddeus was released in the summer of 2017. Found work at a community center in Toledo, tutoring teens in math and science. Slowly rebuilt his life. Paid off the rest of his mother's debts, not with stolen money, but with honest wages. He never robbed another bank. He never needed to. Because sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do isn't to take silence as armor, but to break it and speak. Ohio's Vanishing Room legend turned out to be a crime scene. In the quiet, rolling hills of southeastern Ohio, where the trees grow thick and the fog clings to the valley long after sunrise, there stands an old farmhouse just off State Route 327, near the unincorporated community of Gloucester. The structure, weathered by decades of wind and rain, has stood vacant since the late 1980s, its windows shattered, its roof sagging under the weight of time. Locals have long avoided it, not out of mere disrepair, but because of a story whispered in hushed tones at county fairs and over coffee at roadside diners. They call it the Vanishing Room, a place said to swallow people whole, never to be seen again. For years, it was dismissed as folklore, a ghost tale spun to scare children from wandering too far into the woods. But in the autumn of 2017, when a young man named Thaddeus Mallory disappeared without a trace, the legend took a chilling turn, because what investigators found behind those crumbling walls wasn't a myth, it was a crime scene. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? It was on a crisp morning in early October, the kind where the air smells faintly of damp leaves and wood smoke curls from distant chimneys, that Sheriff Elias Crane received the call. A missing person report had been filed by the elderly aunt of Thaddeus Mallory, a 23-year-old aspiring photographer from Athens, Ohio. Thaddeus had told her he was going to explore some abandoned properties for a photo series titled Forgotten Corners. His last known message, sent via text at 6:47 in the evening on October 3rd, read, "Found something strange at the Gloucester house. The back room doesn't match the floor plan. Walls feel wrong." Then, silence. Sheriff Crane, a man with 31 years on the force and a face lined by both sun and sorrow, knew the Gloucester house by reputation only. He'd heard the stories of hikers who claimed they entered the house and exited miles away, of teenagers who swore they saw a door where none should be, opening into a space that defied logic. But he was a practical man, grounded in evidence, not superstition. Still, when no sign of Thaddeus turned up after 2 days, not at his apartment, not at his favorite diner, not even on surveillance footage from the gas station on Route 59, he ordered a search of the property. The team arrived just after dawn on October 6th, their breath visible in the pale light. The house loomed ahead, surrounded by knee-high weeds and rusted farm equipment half swallowed by the earth. Deputy Marlowe, a rookie with nerves tighter than a snare drum, led the way, flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. The front door groaned open with a sound like a dying animal, releasing a wave of cold, stale air that carried the scent of mildew and something sharper, something metallic. Inside, the house was eerily intact. Dust coated every surface, but there were no signs of forced entry, no broken furniture, no struggle. It was as if time had simply stopped. Photographs still hung crooked on the walls, a calendar from 1986 frozen on the month of July. Sheriff Crane moved through the kitchen, then the parlor, calling out Thaddeus's name, his voice echoing through the hollow rooms. Nothing answered. Then they reached the hallway. It was here that things began to feel off. The corridor seemed longer than it should have been, stretching farther than the exterior walls allowed. The floorboards creaked unevenly, and the wallpaper, once floral, now peeling in long strips, pulsed faintly in the draft, as though breathing. Deputy Marlowe paused, turning to the sheriff. "Sir, did we pass that door before?" he asked, pointing to a narrow paneled entrance on the left. Crane frowned. He didn't remember it. They opened it. Beyond lay a small room no more than 10 feet by 12, but everything about it felt unnatural. The ceiling sloped downward at an impossible angle, though the house outside had a flat roof. The walls were covered in crude symbols, drawn in what later tests would confirm as human blood, layered over decades. And in the center of the floor, a circle had been etched into the wood, filled with ash and bone fragments. Most disturbing of all, the room had no window, yet a faint greenish light seemed to emanate from the corners, flickering like old television static. Sheriff Crane's radio crackled. "We've got movement on thermal," came the voice of Officer Lyle, stationed outside. "Two figures, inside the house. One near the back hall. The other, sir. The second heat signature is coming from inside the west wall." Crane turned slowly, flashlight beam cutting through the dust. There was no west wall in this room, it faced north. His pulse quickened. He stepped toward the northern wall, pressing his palm against the plaster. It gave slightly, like soft clay. He pushed harder, and his hand sank through. He yanked it back with a gasp. The hole sealed itself instantly, leaving no mark. "This isn't possible," Marlowe whispered, backing away. "This isn't real." But it was real. And worse, it was occupied. Later analysis would reveal traces of DMT and other hallucinogenic compounds in the air, suggesting someone had been burning psychoactive substances to induce altered states. But forensic teams also uncovered human remains buried beneath the floorboards, 3 sets of bones, carbon dated to the 1970s, 80s, and early 2000s. Dental records confirmed one belonged to a woman named Elspeth Vorn, reported missing in 1979 after telling friends she was investigating a doorway to another place in rural Ohio. And then there was Thaddeus. On October 9th, during a second sweep of the property, K-9 Unit Officer Renata Cho discovered a trapdoor hidden beneath a collapsed section of the basement. Behind it, a narrow tunnel descended into darkness. The walls were lined with photographs, dozens of them taken inside the vanishing room. Faces stared out from the images, mouths open in silent screams, eyes wide with terror. Among them was Thaddeus, captured mid-stride, unaware, seconds before vanishing from the known world. At the end of the tunnel, they found him, not alive. Not exactly. His body was seated upright, propped against the stone wall, dressed in the same clothes he'd worn the night he disappeared. His skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over his bones. His eyes were open, pupils dilated, fixed on a point beyond the ceiling. In his lap lay a leather-bound journal filled with frantic handwriting, sketches of shifting corridors, spiraling staircases leading nowhere, and repeated phrases, "It watches, it learns. It remembers names." The final entry, dated October 4th, just one day after his last text read, "I think I'm still here. I think I never left. But something else is wearing my face now. If you find this, don't go back, don't look for the door, it knows you're looking, it's always listening." The case was officially closed in March of 2018. Authorities cited homicide, though no suspect was ever identified. The house was condemned and scheduled for demolition, but crews refused to touch it. Dynamite placed at the foundation failed to detonate. Bulldozers stalled mid-approach, engines dead despite full tanks. Eventually, the state erected a chain-link fence around the property, topped with barbed wire, and posted warning signs, "No trespassing, hazardous structure." Yet, even now, nearly 7 years later, locals report seeing lights in the windows on foggy nights. Hunters claim to hear whispers drifting through the trees, voices calling names of people who've never been to Gloucester. And sometimes, on the edge of sleep, residents swear they feel a pressure behind their eyes, a sensation of being pulled not forward, but sideways into a space that shouldn't exist. The vanishing room, it seems, is not done, and perhaps it never will be. Because legends don't die in places like Ohio. They wait, they breathe, they grow hungry. And they remember. Thaddeus Mallory was not the first. He certainly won't be the last. So the next time you drive down a lonely road, past a house that looks just a little too still, a little too quiet, ask yourself, does the layout make sense? Do the doors line up? And when you pass by, do you feel, just for a second, as though the air has thickened and something on the other side of the wall has noticed you? Be careful. Some rooms don't let go. Some doors only open one way. And some houses, like the one near Gloucester, standing sentinel in the mist, don't just hold secrets, they feed on them. The investigation remained open for months, though leads dried up faster than puddles in summer heat. Psychologists analyzed Thaddeus's journal, concluding he likely suffered a psychotic break induced by toxins or isolation. Skeptics pointed to mold, carbon monoxide, or underground gas leaks as explanations for the hallucinations, but none could explain the photos. None could explain how his body appeared untouched by decay, preserved in a state that defied medical understanding. And no scientist could replicate the phenomenon of the shifting walls, the impossible geometry, the way the room seemed to exist outside normal dimensions. Dr. Corvin Hexton, a parapsychologist from Case Western Reserve University, visited the site in May of 2018. He brought with him electromagnetic field detectors, infrared cameras, and a team of graduate students. They spent 3 days collecting data. On the evening of the third day, Hexton entered the vanishing room alone, determined to meditate and record any anomalies. He never came out. Search parties combed the area for weeks. His equipment was found scattered near the basement entrance, cameras smashed, notebooks burned, audio recorders filled with static, and, at one point, a whisper in Hexton's voice, "It showed me the others." They're still walking. They don't know they're dead. After that, the state declared the property off-limits indefinitely. The fence was reinforced, motion sensors installed, helicopter flyovers increased. But still, the stories persist. In 2022, a drone operated by a storm chaser caught footage of the house during a thunderstorm. In one frame, clear, undeniable, the back door opens. A figure steps out. Tall, thin, wearing a coat that flaps in a wind no one else feels. The face is blurred, distorted, as if reality itself refuses to focus on it, and in its hand, it holds a camera. Thaddeus's camera. The video went viral, then vanished from the internet within hours, pulled by unknown authorities. The storm chaser claimed he received a visit from men in dark suits who said nothing, only handed him a sealed envelope and left. Inside was a single photograph, his own face, taken from inside his bedroom sometime during the night. No one believes him, but those who've studied the vanishing room know the truth. It doesn't just take people, it replaces them, and the ones who come back aren't really back at all. They're echoes. Echoes with instructions. Now consider this. When you walk through your home, do you count the doors? Do you notice if the hallway feels longer today than it did yesterday? Have you ever stood in a room and thought, just for a moment, that the walls leaned in slightly, as if listening? Because somewhere, deep in the heart of Ohio, a room waits. A room with no right to exist. A room that remembers every footstep, every breath, every name spoken within its walls. And if you listen closely, on the very edge of silence, you might hear it. Not a creak, not the wind, but a whisper, calling yours.